The morning my unit came to Grover's Mill, I was not with them. I was sitting in a hospital room 40 miles away, watching a saline drip and staring at a ceiling that had nothing interesting on it. My left shoulder was bandaged from collarbone to mid-arm. 2 ribs had been taped 3 days earlier. I had a mild concussion that the doctors kept calling unremarkable, which I found ironic given everything that had produced it. My commanding officer had visited the evening before. He sat in the chair beside my bed, still in uniform, and told me what the unit was planning. I told him it wasn't necessary. He looked at me the way he always looked at me when I said things that were technically true but functionally wrong. "It's already arranged," he said. I didn't argue after that, because here is what I knew about my parents that he didn't. They had spent 9 years telling anyone who would listen that my military career was embarrassing, that a woman in uniform was something between a phase and a joke, that I had wasted every advantage they had given me on something that would never amount to anything real. And they had said all of that while I was building something they didn't have clearance to understand. So when 22 members of my unit arrived at my parents' house on a Tuesday morning in October, in vehicles, in uniform, with a citation and a folded flag, I was not there to see my father's face. But my sister called me afterward and described it in detail. I have thought about that description almost every day since. This is the story of everything that came before it. Grover's Mill, Kentucky was a town that took pride in staying exactly the same. Same families on the same streets for 3 and 4 generations. Same church on the corner of Birch and Elm. Same diner where the coffee was weak and the opinions were strong, and where people discussed their neighbors with the confident authority of people who had known each other too long to be surprised by anything. My parents, Frank and Loretta Decker, were among the town's most permanent fixtures. My father had worked at the county assessor's office for 31 years. He was the kind of man who confused routine with virtue, as though showing up to the same building every morning for 3 decades was itself a form of achievement, regardless of what happened inside. He was not cruel in the violent way. He was cruel in the quieter, more durable way, the way that uses words like realistic and practical and sensible to close doors before anyone reaches them. My mother, Loretta, was different from him in temperament and identical to him in outcome. She was warm where he was cool. She laughed easily, kept the house beautiful, brought casseroles to sick neighbors, and was genuinely loved by most people who knew her. She was also the kind of woman who needed social approval the way lungs need air. What the neighbors thought was not a consideration for her. It was a governing principle. Together, they produced 3 children. My brother Marcus was the eldest. He had followed my father into county government and was now a deputy assessor, which in Grover's Mill was the approximate equivalent of royalty. My sister Jana was 2 years younger than me and had married a local contractor at 22, producing 2 children in quick succession, buying a house 4 streets from my parents, and becoming, in my mother's words, everything a daughter should be. Then there was me, Sergeant First Class, later Master Sergeant Renata Decker, the one who left. I was not supposed to leave. That was the part they never forgave. Not that I joined the Army. They might have survived that eventually, reframed it, found a way to make it socially acceptable in the telling. What they couldn't survive was that I left and didn't come back, that I built a life in a direction they couldn't follow and didn't understand, that every promotion, every deployment, every assignment put more distance between me and the version of Renata Decker they had planned for, without asking me. The signs were there from the beginning if you knew to look. I was 9 years old when I first understood how my parents saw me. Marcus had just won some kind of county youth leadership award. I don't remember exactly which one. There were several. They tended to accumulate around Marcus like leaves accumulate around a tree in autumn. The house was full of relatives eating my mother's cooking and congratulating my father on raising such an exceptional son. I had won a regional science competition the same week. I had built a working model of water filtration system from materials I collected in the woods behind the school, because I had read about clean water access, and it bothered me the way injustice bothers children who haven't learned to look away from it. My father mentioned it once, briefly, to an uncle who asked directly. "Renata did something with science," he said. Then he turned back to Marcus. That was the week I understood. In this family, what I did was something. What Marcus did was something. The difference between those two sentences was the entire shape of my childhood. My mother's version of this pattern was subtler, and because of that, more persistent. She never dismissed me directly. She worried about me instead. Which sounds caring until you understand that her worry was never about whether I was okay. It was about whether I was becoming something she could describe without apology at the diner on Saturday morning. When I said I wanted to apply to the military, she sat across from me at the kitchen table and held my hands and looked at me with genuine anxiety in her eyes. She said, "Renata, you're a pretty girl. You're smart. There are so many easier paths." "I don't want an easier path," I said. She squeezed my hands. "That's what worries me." She didn't mean it unkindly. That was the thing. She genuinely believed that wanting difficulty was a symptom of something, rather than the beginning of everything. My father's version was more direct. "Women who go into the army," he said one Sunday evening, not looking up from the television, "come back different, not in good ways." "Different how?" I asked. "Hard, unmarried, difficult." He said all three words the same way, like they were synonyms. I left for basic training in a February morning. My mother hugged me at the door for a long time. My father shook my hand, brief, firm, the handshake of a man completing a transaction. Marcus was already at work. Jaina was at school. I drove myself to the bus station. I didn't cry until I was on the highway, and then only for a few minutes. Not from grief exactly, from the specific relief of a person who has finally stopped waiting for permission to begin. The Army took everything I thought I knew about myself and rebuilt it from the foundation up. Not because it broke me. It didn't. What it did was more precise. It took the anger I had been carrying since childhood, the quiet, disciplined rage of a girl who had been told repeatedly that her instincts were wrong and her ambitions were suspicious, and gave it a place to go, a structure, a uniform, a rank. Basic training was the first time in my life I was evaluated purely on what I could do, not who my father was, not how the neighbors saw me, not whether I was becoming the right kind of woman by Grover's Mill standards. Just, could I run the distance? Could I carry the weight? Could I think clearly when the situation was moving faster than any plan could absorb? I could. That discovery was, I think, the most important thing that ever happened to me. I went to Fort Bragg after basic, then Germany, then a rotation in Kuwait that lasted 14 months. I came back quieter than I left and was promoted within 6 months. Then Afghanistan, 2 rotations back to back with a 4-month gap between them. Then an assignment I cannot discuss in any detail, in a location I am still not permitted to name, doing work that has no civilian equivalent and no simple explanation. I sent letters home during the early years. My mother wrote back regularly, warm, detailed letters about the town and the family and the neighbors, the kind that made home feel both near and entirely unreachable at the same time. My father sent 3 letters in 9 years. All of them were short. All of them ended with some variation of, "Hope you're staying safe," and "Thinking about what comes next." What comes next? As though the present was always a way station to something more legitimate. Marcus called occasionally, friendly enough, distracted, the calls of a man ticking a box rather than having a conversation. Jaina called more often and meant it more, though even she admitted she didn't understand what I was doing or why I kept doing it. What none of them knew, what I could not tell them, was who I was becoming. By my 5th year, I was leading teams in environments that would have been unrecognizable to anyone in Grover's Mill. By my 7th year, I had been recommended for a specialized unit that required a background investigation so thorough that investigators spoke to people I hadn't thought about since primary school. By my 9th year, I held a rank and a record that my parents would not have been able to contextualize, even if I had been permitted to describe it. Back home, the story they told about me was simpler. I knew this because Jaina told me the truth, which she was always braver about than anyone else in our family. She told me what my mother said at church gatherings when people asked about her younger daughter. She told me what my father said at the diner when the subject of military service came up in general conversation. My mother's version: "Renata is still doing the army thing. You know how she is, always had to go her own way." My father's version: "She's a sergeant. It's not a career, it's a lifestyle. I keep hoping she'll figure out what she actually wants to do with her life." I was leading operations in conditions they could not imagine. He was hoping I would figure out what I wanted. I kept that sentence somewhere interior and cold, where it couldn't affect the work. The work required everything I had. There was no space in it for the particular grief of being unseen by the people who were supposed to see you first. That grief had a place. I visited it occasionally at night in the specific silence of bases where everything outside the wire was uncertain. Then I put it away, and I went back to work. I was in a transit facility in Germany when the call came. Late evening, cold, the kind of flat fluorescent light that makes everyone look like they haven't slept in days, which in that facility was usually accurate. I was sitting with a cup of coffee that had stopped being hot 30 minutes ago, reviewing logistics for the next leg of a movement I cannot describe, when my phone showed Jaina's name. Jaina didn't call at this hour unless something was real. I answered immediately. "Dad had a heart attack," she said. The words arrived calmly, the way Jaina delivered difficult things, directly, without preamble, because she had learned that softening bad news only extends the moment of impact without reducing it. "How bad?" I said. "Bad enough. He's stable now. But Renata," she paused, "you should come home." I looked at the logistics documents in front of me, the movement, the timeline, the people depending on the planning being complete. "When did it happen?" "This morning. He's in regional medical. She's holding together, but she's scared." Another pause. "He asked for you." That stopped me. My father, Frank Decker, the man who shook my hand like a contractor at the bus station, the man who had spent 9 years explaining away my career to anyone who asked, and when the worst moment of his life arrived, it was my name in his mouth. I went to see him an hour later. He was smaller in the hospital bed than I had ever seen him. Not physically, he was still Frank Decker, broad-shouldered, gray-haired, the physical presence I had measured myself against my entire childhood. But illness removes something from people that has nothing to do with size. It removes the performance, the posture, the carefully managed version they show the world. He looked at me when I came in. "Renata," he said. Just my name, nothing attached to it. "Hi, Dad." He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at me. "You came fast." You asked for me." He was quiet. His hands rested on top of the blanket, still and unfamiliar. My father's hands were always moving, always occupied, always managing something. "The doctors say I have to slow down," he said finally. "That's usually what a heart attack means." He almost smiled. Almost. Your mother is going to enjoy that. We sat in silence for a while, not the heavy kind, just the kind two people who don't know how to start sit inside until one of them finds a place to begin. He never apologized that day. I wasn't expecting him to, but something in the room had shifted, some permanent rearrangement of who held what between us. He had asked for me when he was afraid. That was its own kind of sentence, short and complete, and not requiring translation. I stayed in Rover's Mill for 9 days. On the 7th day, my mother made a comment at dinner that I should think about leaving the army now that my father needed support at home. My father, from his chair, told her to let it be. It was the first time he had ever said that. Jaina looked at me across the table. I looked back at her. Neither of us said anything. Some things don't need saying. They just need witnessing.
I went back to active duty 3 weeks after my father came home from the hospital. The mission I returned to was the most complex of my career. I cannot describe it in operational detail. What I can say is that it involved a 4-month deployment into conditions that required every skill I had developed across 9 years of service, and several I had never needed to use at maximum capacity before. It involved decisions made in the dark, with incomplete information and no margin for error. It involved people depending on my judgment in moments when my judgment was the only thing standing between them and outcomes that would have been permanent. It went wrong on a Wednesday in March. Not catastrophically wrong. We accomplished the mission, everyone came home, but the last 72 hours of it were the kind that strip everything down to the essential. No performance, no comfort, no version of yourself that isn't purely functional. Just the work, just the people beside you, just the next decision and the one after that. I took shrapnel to the left shoulder during the extraction phase. Not immediately life-threatening, enough to ground me for 6 weeks and require surgery that would have been more dramatic if I had allowed myself to register it in real time, which I did not because there was still work to do. I was evacuated to a military medical facility in Germany. Surgery, recovery, the particular tedium of lying in a bed watching the ceiling when your body is healing and your mind cannot slow down to match it. My commanding officer, Colonel James Hargrove, visited on the 4th day. He was a tall, deliberate man who had led people in difficult places for 20 years and had the specific quality of someone who never said more than was necessary and never said less than was true. He sat in the chair beside my bed and told me that my actions during the final 72 hours of the mission had been flagged for commendation review. He explained, without ceremony, what that meant procedurally and what would follow. Then he said something I had not expected. Is there family we should notify? Someone who should know what happened? I thought about my parents, about my mother's dinner comment, about my father's hands folded on the hospital blanket, about 9 years of my career being described as a lifestyle by a man who asked for me when he was afraid. My parents are in Kentucky, I said. My father had a cardiac event in October. He's recovering. Hargrove looked at me carefully. Do they know what you do? They know I'm a sergeant. Do they know what that means? I paused. No. He was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, German winter was doing what German winter does. Gray, flat, relentless, the kind of weather that makes everything feel slightly more permanent than it is. There's a protocol, he said carefully. When a soldier is injured on a classified operation and family notification is appropriate, the unit sometimes... He stopped, chose his words. The unit sometimes makes the visit themselves, in person, in uniform. I looked at him. All of them? As many as are stateside and available. His expression didn't change. It's not required, it's a choice. Some soldiers prefer a phone call. I thought about my father at the dinner table saying, "Let it be." I thought about my mother describing my career to the ladies at church as something I was still doing. I thought about 9 years of being the daughter who went her own way, the lifestyle, not the career, the sergeant, not the soldier. "Let them come," I said. Hargrove nodded once. The conversation was over. 3 days later, in Grover's Mill, Kentucky, on a Tuesday morning in October, 22 members of my unit arrived at my parents' house. Jana called me 40 minutes after it happened. She had driven to our parents' house that morning for reasons unrelated to any of this. She needed to drop something off, a casserole or a document, something ordinary. She arrived at the same time as the second vehicle. "Renata," she said when I answered. Her voice had something in it I had never heard from her before. "I know. Like actual soldiers, in uniform, trucks, they're—" She stopped. I heard her breathing. "Mom is on the porch. She doesn't understand what's happening." "Put her on." "She can't. Renata, she's crying already and they haven't even said anything yet." I closed my eyes. Jana described it to me then in real time, in fragments, the way people describe things that are moving faster than words can follow. The vehicles had pulled up in 2 groups, standard army trucks, nothing dramatic, but on a residential street in Grover's Mill, they might as well have been a procession. 22 soldiers in dress uniform had exited and formed up along the front path of my parents' house, with the particular precision of people who have been trained to do everything with meaning. My father had come to the door before anyone knocked. Jana said he stood in the doorframe the way he always stood in doorframes, filling them, managing them, a man accustomed to being the most significant presence in any space he occupied. And then he looked at the front path, and something happened to his face that she did not have a word for. She tried several before settling on the closest one. She looked like he didn't recognize where he was, she said. Colonel Hargrove had walked forward from the group. He was in full dress uniform. He introduced himself by rank and name, and Jana said that the moment my father heard the rank, something shifted in him again. Not fear, something more like recalibration. Hargrove had said, "Mr. Decker, I'm here on behalf of Master Sergeant Renata Decker's unit. Your daughter was injured in the performance of her duties 3 weeks ago. She is recovering and will make a full recovery. We are here because her unit wanted you to understand the context of what she does and what she is." My mother made a sound. Jana said it wasn't a word, just a sound, the sound a person makes when something breaks open that has been closed for a long time. Then Hargrove presented the citation. Jana read it to me later, slowly, because I asked her to. I want to write here only what is possible to share. It described actions taken during a classified operational deployment, commended judgment under conditions of direct threat, and listed 2 specific decisions I had made during the final 72 hours of the mission that were characterized in the formal language of military commendation as instrumental in preserving the safety of personnel under my command. Jana said my father took the citation with both hands. Both hands, not one, not the single-handed transactional grip of a man completing a formality. Both hands, like he was holding something fragile. He read it standing there on the porch. He read it slowly. Jana said he read it twice before he lowered it. Then he looked at Hargrove and said something. His voice was low enough that Jana couldn't hear it from where she stood, but she saw Hargrove's response. He gave a single nod, slow and deliberate, the nod of a man confirming something that should have been confirmed a long time ago. Hargrove nodded back. Then he turned toward the house and went inside. My mother remained on the porch. She shook hands with every soldier present. Jana counted. All 22. She shook every hand and she said something to each of them, and Jana said whatever she said, several of them nodded in the same deliberate way Hargrove had. Afterwards, when the vehicles had gone and the street was quiet again, my mother sat down on the porch. She sat there for a long time. Jana sat beside her. Neither of them spoke. Grover's Mill moved around them in its ordinary Tuesday morning way, a neighbor's dog barking, a delivery truck turning at the end of the street, the distant sound of the school bell 2 blocks over. Finally, my mother said, Why didn't she tell us? Jana thought about how to answer. She couldn't, she said. Some of it she wasn't allowed to. And the rest? Jana was quiet for a moment. The rest, I think she stopped expecting us to want to know. My mother looked at her hands, the way she did when she was absorbing something difficult, processing it honestly rather than managing it into a shape that felt better. We didn't ask, she said, finally. Not a question, not a defense, just a fact stated plainly, received fully. Jana didn't answer. She didn't need to.
My mother called me that evening. I was still in the medical facility in Germany. The shoulder was healing on schedule. I had been cleared to sit up for longer periods, which I used primarily to read and to stare out a window at a courtyard where snow had been falling in thin, intermittent sheets since morning. When I saw her name, I sat up straighter without meaning to. 9 years of conditioning. My mother calling in the evening usually meant something needed managing. Renata. Her voice was different than I expected. Quieter, less structured. Hi, Mom. A pause, longer than usual. Are you in pain? Not much. The shoulder is healing. The doctor, Colonel Hargrove, said you'd make a full recovery. That's what they tell me. Another pause. I waited. My mother was someone who needed time to find the sentences for difficult things. I had learned long ago that rushing her produced only the surface layer and missed everything underneath. He stood there for an hour, she said. Hargrove. He answered every question your father asked, and Frank asked... She stopped. Something in her breath shifted. He asked about all of it, Renata. Everything. The deployments, the rank, what the citation meant, how decisions get made in the field. He asked questions I didn't even know enough to think of. I was quiet. He didn't know, she said. We didn't know. We thought we understood what you were doing. We thought sergeant meant... I don't know what we thought it meant, something smaller than what it means. It's all right, I said. It isn't. Her voice was firm in a way I had rarely heard from her. Not defensive, honest. It isn't all right. We made you feel small for something that wasn't small. I made comments, at church, at dinner, things I said about your choices. She stopped. Renata, I didn't know. That's not an excuse. I should have asked. We should have tried harder to understand. I looked out the window at the falling snow. You're asking now, I said. Too late? Not completely. She was quiet for a moment. Your father wants to talk to you. He's been sitting at the kitchen table since Hargrove left. He hasn't moved much. Jana said he read the citation 4 times. Tell him I'll call tomorrow when I'm less tired. He won't sleep tonight anyway. Neither will I admitted. She made a small sound, not quite a laugh, something warmer than that. The sound of a woman hearing her daughter tell the truth for the first time in a conversation between them. We kept your room, she said, almost suddenly, like it needed saying before she lost the nerve. All these years, I kept the curtains you picked when you were 16, the blue ones. I pressed my lips together. The blue ones, I repeated. I don't know why I'm telling you that. I'm glad you did. We stayed on the line without speaking for a few seconds. Outside, the snow was thickening now, and the courtyard below had gone completely white and completely still, and I sat in a hospital bed in Germany thinking about blue curtains in a room in Kentucky and feeling, for the first time in a very long time, the precise location of the thing I had been carrying the absence of. Not forgiveness, not yet. We hadn't earned that yet, either of us. But the beginning of something. The willingness to begin. I came home in December. My shoulder was cleared for travel 6 weeks after surgery. My commanding officer told me to take 30 days. I told him I only needed 2 weeks. He told me to take 30 days. I took 22 days, which felt like a reasonable negotiation. Yana picked me up at Louisville Airport on a gray December afternoon. She hugged me at the arrivals gate, long and without hurry, the hug of a sister rather than a greeter. In the car on the drive to Grover's Mill, she didn't ask about the injury or the deployment. She talked about her kids, about a renovation she and her husband were doing to the back of the house, about a neighbor's dog who had decided the Decker family lawn was his personal territory. I listened. I watched the Kentucky fields go gray and flat under a winter sky. I felt my shoulders lower from somewhere near my ears to something closer to their normal position.
If this story reached you, I want to speak to you directly for a moment. Not as a narrator closing out a narrative, as one person to another, honestly. Some of you have parents who don't understand what you're building, who describe your choices in the language of concern when what they mean is that your choices make them uncomfortable, who love you in ways that don't quite reach you, because love without curiosity is incomplete. And curiosity requires the humility to admit you don't already know everything about the person in front of you. If that's you, hear this. You do not need their understanding in order to keep building. You do not need their vocabulary to grow around your choices before the choices are worth making. The work you are doing in the dark, without witnesses, without approval, without anyone sending letters to Grover's Mill on your behalf, that work is real. It counts. It is becoming something, whether or not anyone in your family has the clearance to see it yet. Most parents who diminish their children are not cruel people. They're frightened people. They are people whose own horizons narrowed somewhere along the way, and who experience your wider horizon as an accusation rather than an invitation. That is their wound, not your verdict. You are not required to shrink to make them comfortable. You are not required to wait for their recognition before you recognize yourself. And you are allowed, fully, finally, without guilt, to keep going, to build the thing, to become the person, to trust that if the understanding ever comes, it will come in its own time, in its own form, in its own driveway on a December afternoon. And if it never comes, you will still have built something real. That has always been enough. It always will be. One last thing. Leave me a comment and tell me where you're watching from tonight. And tell me this. Have you ever had to keep building something while the people closest to you couldn't see what you were building? Have you ever had to choose between needing to be understood and deciding to move forward anyway? Because that choice is one of the bravest things a person can make, and I think more people make it in silence than we ever talk about. If this story said something you needed to hear, pass it forward. Share it with someone who is in the middle of that silence right now, someone who is building in the dark and needs to be reminded that the dark doesn't make the work less real. And if you want to stay with us, more stories about the complicated, imperfect, ultimately human work of becoming someone your younger self needed to see, subscribe now. The next story is already coming. It is going to find exactly who it needs to find. Thank you for listening.